Hello, boys and girls. I'm so excited to be back with you today. We're going to be starting a brand new Listen and Learn unit. Now, these stories, some of them may be ones you've heard before, and some of these may be similar to stories you've heard before. What we're going to be listening to today are stories called folk tales, which we know are a fiction story, which means it's been made up in our author's head and then passed on from person to person. And then finally, someone said this story was so amazing, they wrote it down so it could be shared with everyone. All right, so we know our stories are not real, but they are very entertaining. So another great thing that we're going to be talking about is where these stories come from. So boys and girls, our first story today comes from France, which is in Europe. It would be near where Beth and Nat went to the UK, but not quite the same place. So our story today is called Cinderella. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Cinderella. Yeah, this is a familiar story that maybe we ourselves might know a little bit about. Now, it might not be quite the same as the one we've watched at home, but let's sit back and get ready to listen. Now, before we start our story, there's always a couple words that we might want to know ahead of time of our story. So let's take a look at a few of those words, shall we? All right. So in our story today, one of our words that you'll hear us talk a lot about is characters. Now, characters will more be a word that I talk about with you because we're going to focus on who are our characters in our story. And that means who are the people or who are the animals doing things in our story. Embraced. That's another word for a hug. Maybe the mom and dad embraced after not seeing each other for a while. Splendor. That means like, oh, splendid. It means something is great. Warning. You might give a warning. Oh, wait, the stove is hot. Wait, warning. You might holler out at a warning. And worthy means someone who is good and does a lot of great things. As I said, one of our words is embraced. To hold someone in your arms to show love. You might embrace your grandma and grandpa when you haven't seen them in a while. So let's sit back and get ready to listen. Now we want to make sure that we're paying attention because we will compare these stories over the next couple days. Once there was a poor girl who was called Cinderella. Cinderella lived with her stepmother and her two stepsisters. Her stepmother was mean to Cinderella and forced her to do the hardest, dirtiest work in the house. The poor girl had to scour the dishes and scrub the floors and wash the clothes all by herself. When her work was done, Cinderella would sit tired and alone by the fireplace among the ashes and cinders, and that is why they called her Cinderella. Cinderella's stepsister lived in splendor. They had soft beds, thick carpet, and silver-edged mirrors. Poor Cinderella had to sleep on the floor next to the fire. One day, the king's son, the prince, announced that he was going to hold a royal ball at the royal palace. It would be a grand evening of dancing, and all the young ladies in the kingdom were invited. Oh, when they heard the announcement, Cinderella's stepsisters shrieked with excitement. For days, they primped in front of their mirrors and talked about nothing but the ball. They shouted orders at Cinderella and ran her ragged while they got ready for the ball. Cinderella, shouted the older sister, shine my shoes. Cinderella, called the younger, iron out this wrinkle in my dress. Cinderella helped her stepsisters get ready without complaining. Silently, however, she longed and wished to go to the ball. She imagined herself dancing in the arms of the prince. How wonderful it would be, and yet she knew her stepmother would never allow her to go. At last the time came and the stepsisters and their mother left for the palace. Cinderella watched them drive away, and when she lost sight of them, she began to cry. She felt so miserable and so alone. But Cinderella was not alone at all. She heard a gentle voice ask, "What's the matter, dear?" She looked up and saw a woman with a kind face. I wish I could," began Cinderella, but she could not finish for all of her tears and sobbing. "You wish to go to the ball? Is that it?" said the kind woman. "Why, yes," said Cinderella with surprise. "Then it shall be so, Cinderella. You are a kind girl, worthy, and deserve to go to the ball," said the woman. For you see, the woman was Cinderella's fairy godmother. "Now run into the garden," she said to Cinderella, "and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went to the garden, puzzled. She picked a large pumpkin and set it on the ground before the kind woman. The fairy godmother tapped it with her magic wand, and it turned into a dazzling coach lined with satin. "Now, dear," said the fairy godmother, "bring me the mouse trap from inside the house." Cinderella brought the trap, which had 6 live mice. Fairy godmother released the mice and waved her magic wand over them, turning them into a set of 6 gray horses. And then, with the touch of her wand, she turned a big rat into a fat, jolly coachman with long, fancy whiskers. "Well," said Fairy Godmother with a smile, "what do you think? Aren't you pleased? Are you ready to go to the ball?" "Oh, yes," cried Cinderella. "But must I go in these rags?" Fairy Godmother laughed, and then with a touch of her wand, she changed Cinderella's tattered clothes into a glittering gown of gold, and on her feet appeared a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the world. Cinderella stepped into the coach, but before she left, her fairy godmother gave her a stern warning. "Do not stay at the ball after midnight, not even for a moment. When the clock strikes 12, the coach will once again be a pumpkin, the horses will be mice, the coachman a rat, and your gown the same clothes that you had on." Cinderella promised she would leave before midnight. Then, calling out her thanks, away she rode in the coach, feeling happier than she had ever felt before. When Cinderella arrived at the ball, everyone admired her beauty. The prince asked Cinderella to dance with him. They danced together once, then twice, and then again and again. Cinderella's face shone with happiness. Everyone at the ball looked on. Everyone, that is, but 2 stepsisters. They glared jealously at this lovely lady, even though they had no idea that they were glaring at Cinderella, because they did not recognize her in her beautiful gown. For Cinderella, the music, the dancing, the warm gaze of the prince all seemed like a wonderful dream. How quickly time slipped away when the heart is happy. As Cinderella began to dance again with the prince, she heard the palace clock begin to toll. Boom, boom. "Oh my!" she gasped. "What time is it?" "Midnight," said the prince. "Oh, midnight!" Cinderella's cheeks grew pale. She turned and fast as a deer ran out of the ballroom. She sprinted down a long hallway, then down a staircase. At the foot of the stairs, she stumbled. One of her slippers fell off, but Cinderella could not stop. As she ran breathlessly out of the castle into the darkness, she heard the clock strike midnight and felt her smooth gown turn into a rough cloth of her everyday clothes. Her dazzling coach had turned back into a pumpkin, so she ran home alone. When she got there, though, she realized she was still wearing one glass slipper. When Cinderella had run away, the prince had raced after her. Although he did not catch her, he did find partway down the staircase a glass slipper that had fallen off her foot. And that is why the very next morning the sound of trumpets woke the kingdom. The prince announced that he would marry the woman whose foot fit in the glass slipper. He sent his men out on a mission. They were to try the slipper on the foot of every maiden in the land. Oh, from house to house they went, trying the slipper on foot after foot. On one foot the slipper was too long, on another too short. And so it went until they came to the house of Cinderella and her stepsisters. Cinderella's stepsisters tried to fit their feet into the slipper. They squeezed and pinched and pushed, but the slipper would not fit. Then, from the shadows, Cinderella stepped forth and said, "Please let me see if it will fit." "You?" cried the stepsisters. "That's ridiculous. Every young woman in the kingdom is supposed to try it on. That includes me," stated Cinderella. The prince's men agreed. And as the prince had given strict instructions that every maiden was supposed to try it on, one of the men placed the slipper on Cinderella's foot and it fit perfectly. The stepsisters' mouths dropped open in astonishment. They were even more shocked that from her pocket, Cinderella drew forth the other glass slipper. And only then did the stepsisters understand the beautiful lady they had seen at the ball was Cinderella. They threw themselves at her feet and begged for forgiveness. Cinderella was so kind-hearted that she forgave them when they embraced or hugged. Cinderella married the prince. Her stepmother and stepsisters were invited to live in the palace, and her and the prince lived happily ever after. Fantastic job listening, boys and girls. So boys and girls, you're going to be doing something a little bit different today. Often we have been writing things that we've learned. Today you'll be getting a writing paper that asks you to tell us what's the first thing that happened in the story, tell me what happened in the middle, then tell me what happened last. We're wanting one sentence for each. Now I know there's a lot of details that can go in the story, but you want to give me a main idea from the beginning, the main idea from the middle, and the main idea from the end. Great job, boys and girls. See you soon.